When I got married, my mother-in-law said, "I can't comprehend why you're still working." Gary's mother scoffed, her disdain clear as day. "A woman's place is at home with her children." Gary, my husband, never defended me. He'd always dismiss their derogatory remarks, advising me to just ignore them. But their words were like relentless needles, chipping away at my self-esteem. With my mother gone and my marriage crumbling, resentment towards Gary grew. He had never truly stood by me, leaving me to fend for myself against his parents' criticism and never siding with me. I remember being pregnant with Amanda and hearing his parents express their hope for a grandson. Their disappointment was unmistakable when she was born. "Next time, make sure it's a boy," they had remarked, barely hiding their dissatisfaction. It was heartbreaking to see my daughter subjected to such blatant favoritism. Now, Gary wanted to use my inheritance to move closer to his parents, to immerse us further into their toxic environment. The thought infuriated me. I couldn't and wouldn't let that happen. As I sat in the quiet surrounded by reminders of my mother, a plan began to form in my mind. I refused to be bullied into submission. I would fight back, not just for myself, but for my children too. Gary had shown his true colors, and it was time for him to face the consequences. Over the next few days, I gathered documents and prepared for a legal battle. My lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Miss Kathleen, assured me we had a strong case. "Don't worry, Denise," she said confidently. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready for this war. I would stand my ground for the sake of my dignity and for the future of my children, no longer the passive observer of my own life. "I'll make sure the inheritance stays right where it belongs," I declared, a confident smile breaking across my face. One evening, while sorting through my mother's items, I discovered an old, dusty envelope hidden in a drawer. Inside, a treasure trove of stock certificates and property deeds revealed themselves. My hands shook as I grasped the magnitude of my mother's secret financial accumulations. The stocks and properties combined were worth a staggering $6 million. I was in disbelief. My mother had lived such a modest life, yet here she was, sitting on a small fortune. She had been incredibly frugal, but I had no idea she had saved so much. An accompanying note, written in her neat, careful handwriting, read, "Denise, I saved this for a rainy day. I hope it gives you and the kids a better life. Use it wisely." Tears filled my eyes as her foresight and love enveloped me, a comforting embrace from beyond the grave. Determined to set things straight with Gary about his intentions for my inheritance, I confronted him the next day. He was in the living room, idly flipping through a magazine. "Gary, we need to talk," I said, my voice firm. He glanced up, annoyance flickering in his eyes. "What is it now, Denise?" "I found something my mother left behind," I started, holding up the envelope. "It turns out she left me stocks and properties worth $6 million. Gary's eyes widened, a clear mix of shock and greed flashing across his face. $6 million? "That's great news," he exclaimed, his tone unnervingly enthusiastic. "Don't get any ideas, Gary. This money is mine," I asserted firmly, disgusted by his reaction. My resolve was clear. This inheritance was a testament to my mother's love and foresight, and I was not about to let Gary squander it. I was prepared to protect it at all costs, ensuring it would be used as she intended, to provide a better life for me and my children. "And the kids, you won't see a cent of it," I stated, watching as Gary's expression darkened. "You can't just keep it all to yourself, Denise. We're married. What's yours is mine," he snapped back. A surge of anger welled up inside me. "You've shown your true colors, Gary. You don't care about me or the kids. All you see are dollar signs," I accused him. Gary stood abruptly, his face flushing with fury. "You're being selfish, Denise." "I'm thinking about our future, about our family's future," he argued. "What family, Gary? The one you're willing to sell out for your gains?" I retorted sharply. He advanced towards me, fists clenched. "You'll regret this, Denise." "I'll make sure of it," he threatened. I stood firm, unwavering. "Bring it on, Gary. I'm not afraid of you anymore." With that, he stormed out of the room, leaving me to gather my thoughts. I knew this was only the beginning of what would be a long and bitter dispute, but I was prepared to fight for my children, for my mother's legacy, and myself. The following week was a blur of legal consultations and tense silences at home. Gary's demeanor had shifted from shock to a cold, calculated aggression. He was like a caged animal, desperate and dangerous. One evening, after the kids were asleep, Gary cornered me in the kitchen. His eyes were wild, his posture menacing. "You think you're clever, Denise? Hiding that money from me?" he accused harshly. I leaned back against the counter, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "It's not about being clever, Gary. It's about doing what's right. That money is for me and the kids, not for your delusional fantasies," I asserted. He slammed his fist onto the countertop, making me flinch. "I am your husband. I have rights to that money," he claimed aggressively. His words were venomous, but I cut him off. "A what, Gary? A woman who won't bow down to your greed and bullying," I challenged. His face twisted with anger. "You'll regret this, Denise. I'll make sure you don't get a dime of that money." His threatening tone was palpable, and I could feel the looming danger, but my resolve was stronger than ever. I was determined to stand my ground and protect what my mother entrusted me. I refused to show fear. "Is that a threat, Gary?" I demanded as he leaned in close, his breath sour with malice. "It's a promise," he hissed. I pushed past him, my body coursing with adrenaline. "We'll see about that. The court will decide," I declared, striding away while his venomous words echoed behind me. "You're going to be left with nothing, Denise." Nothing. The following day, I received a call from my lawyer. "Denise, Gary has filed for divorce. He's claiming half of your inheritance," she informed me. Taking a deep breath, I felt fear and fierce determination surge within me. "Let him try. I'll fight him every step of the way," I replied. Miss Kathleen's voice was resolute. "We have a strong case, Denise. Don't worry, we'll make sure justice is served." As I lay in bed that night, my thoughts turned to my children sleeping peacefully in their rooms. This battle wasn't just for me. It was for their future. Gary had become a stranger, a man driven by greed and spite, but I was no longer the woman he thought he could bully and intimidate. As I drifted towards sleep, I envisioned the courtroom, the judge and myself standing tall and fighting not just for the inheritance but for my dignity, my children's future, and the quiet strength my mother had always shown. This was my fight, and I was ready. The legal battle that followed was grueling. Gary's strategy was clear: portray me as an uncooperative wife who was hoarding the family's resources. However, his arguments were weak, rooted more in desperation than in legal substance. During a mediation session, a final effort to settle before our court hearing, Gary sat across from me, his lawyer by his side. His gaze was cold, his demeanor confident to the point of arrogance. "Let's be reasonable, Denise," his lawyer started. "Gary is entitled to a portion of this inheritance. It's only fair." I glanced at Miss Kathleen, my resolve unyielding. "Fair? Gary has not contributed to this inheritance. It is solely from my late mother, intended for me and my children," I stated firmly. Gary's claim to my inheritance was not just a legal challenge, but a moral one. I was determined to protect what my mother had painstakingly saved, not just for her peace of mind, but for the security and well-being of her grandchildren. This inheritance was more than just money. It was a legacy, and I would defend it with everything I had. Gary leaned forward, his tone scornful. "Come on, Denise. You're just being spiteful. Don't you think the kids would want their father to have a share?" I felt a surge of anger rise within me. "This isn't about spite, Gary. It's about justice. You've never truly considered what the kids need. This is about your greed," I replied sharply. His lawyer began to interject, but Gary gestured for him to stop. "You think you can just take everything, don't you, Denise? Play the grieving daughter and the victimized wife," he accused. I met his gaze squarely, my voice steady. "This isn't a game, Gary. You're the one trying to take what isn't yours." The mediator, a middle-aged woman with a stern face, tried to bring order. "Let's try to remain civil. This is about finding a resolution." Gary cut her off, his voice rising with frustration. At her resolution? She's the one being unreasonable. The tension in the room was palpable, thick and suffocating. Yet I spoke calmly, yet firmly. I am being perfectly reasonable. I'm protecting what my mother intended for her grandchildren. Gary's claims are baseless. Sensing the discussion was going nowhere, the mediator called for a break. As we stood, Gary leaned close, his breath hot on my ear. "You'll pay for this, Denise. I'll make sure of it." I walked out of the room, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. Gary's threats were empty, his case was weak. I knew the law was on my side, and I was determined to see this through to the end. In the weeks that followed, I dove into legal documents, met regularly with Miss Kathleen, and prepared for the courtroom battle. The children stayed with my sister, shielded from the worst of the conflict. I missed them terribly, but I knew this fight was as much for their future as it was for mine. The day of the hearing finally arrived. Standing in the courtroom, I braced myself to face Gary and counter whatever deceptive narrative he planned to present. This was the moment of truth, and I was ready to stand up for what was right, for the legacy my mother had left behind, and for the future of my children. I was resolute, prepared to channel every ounce of my strength into the battle ahead. The courtroom transformed into a battleground, where words served as weapons and Gary's attorney spun a narrative of a wronged husband unjustly deprived of his rightful share. Yet, under Miss Kathleen's deft cross-examination, his arguments crumbled like a fragile house of cards. During a recess, Gary confronted me in the hallway, his face contorted with fury. "You're ruining everything, Denise. You think you're going to walk away with all that money?" Despite the fear clawing at my insides, I stood firm. "It's not your money, Gary. It never was," I asserted. He moved closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "I'll drag this out as long as it takes. I'll bleed you dry with legal fees." Meeting his gaze, my voice steady and unwavering, I replied, "Do what you must. I won't let you bully me into submission." As we returned to the courtroom, a newfound sense of empowerment surged through me. Gary's threats seemed hollow, his bravado nothing more than a mask for his desperation. The final verdict brought vindication. The judge ruled in my favor, recognizing the inheritance as solely my property. Gary's expression, as the judgment was delivered, was one of utter defeat. However, the victory was tinged with bitterness. I had won the legal battle, but at the expense of my marriage. The family I once knew was now shattered. In the weeks that followed, Gary's life began to unravel. His reputation, once built on intimidation, now crumbled as the community saw him for the greedy man he was, who had tried to claim his wife's inheritance. Word of Gary's misfortunes reached me, detailing his rapid decline, his job gone, his friends distanced, and his reputation in tatters. His fall from grace was sharp, and although I couldn't truly feel pleased about it, there was an undeniable sense of poetic justice to his fate. One evening, a phone call interrupted my thoughts. It was a mutual friend. "Denise, have you heard the latest about Gary?" I paused for a moment. "No, what happened?" "He's leaving town. He's lost his job and his house. He's pretty much destitute." A complex emotion stirred within me. Not quite satisfaction, but something akin to it. Gary had sown seeds of destruction in his quest against me, but ultimately, he was the one who unraveled. After hanging up the phone, I gazed at the picture of my children on the mantel. This struggle had been for them, for their future and their security. That night, as I tucked them into bed, a deep sense of peace washed over me. The battle was over, and we had come out stronger, free from Gary's shadow, and ready to embark on a new chapter. Our lives would be different, but we would be okay. We were together, and that was all that mattered. In the months following the court ruling, life gradually found a new rhythm. The court victory brought me closure, but it also marked the beginning of a new journey, one of healing and rebuilding. I decided to sell our old house, which held too many bitter memories. Each item I packed away was a step further from my past with Gary. I was committed to forging a better future for Amanda and Andrew. One day, while sorting through some old boxes in the attic, I stumbled upon a photo of Gary and me during happier times. For a moment, I allowed myself to grieve for the life I thought we had, for the love I once believed was real. But as I looked at his smiling face in the photo, I realized the man I had married no longer existed. He had shown his true colors, and they were dark and unpleasant. With a decisive movement, I tossed the photo into the trash bin, a symbolic act of letting go. Moving to a new town offered a fresh start. I found a cozy home in a welcoming neighborhood, and the kids enrolled in a new school, quickly making friends. I immersed myself more in my writing, finding solace in the worlds I created with my words. One evening, as I was tucking Amanda into bed, she looked up at me with her big, innocent eyes and asked, "Mom, do you miss Dad?" The question caught me off guard. "Sometimes I miss who I thought your dad was," I admitted softly. "But we're better off now." It was true. Despite everything, we had found a way to move forward, stronger and more united than ever. "We're a strong team, just the three of us," I said, and she nodded, a mature look in her young eyes. "I like it here, Mom. I like our new home," she told me. Her words warmed my heart. We had come a long way. As I lay in bed that night, my thoughts turned to Gary's downfall. His greed and malice had ultimately backfired, leaving him with nothing. While I found no joy in his misfortune, there was a definite sense of justice in the outcome. The kids and I faced a long road ahead, but we were on a path to healing. The inheritance, now securely invested, would provide for their education and our future needs. I closed my eyes, thinking of my mother. Her strength and foresight had been our salvation. In her wisdom, she had given me the means to protect myself and my children. Drifting off to sleep, I felt a profound sense of peace. The storm that had once threatened to uproot our lives had passed, leaving clarity and hope in its wake. We had weathered the worst, and now, with a new day dawning, it felt like anything was possible.